Welcome to the Atlantic Council. I'm Fred Kemp, President and CEO, and I'm delighted to have you with us today, both here in snowy Washington and those joining us online, for today's fireside chat with Korea Zinc's Executive Chairman and CEO, Yun Choi, on allied partnership models for critical minerals security. This event is part of the Global Energy Center's growing work on the materials and supply chains that underpin national economic and energy security. Many of you joined us for our 2025 Critical Minerals Supply Chain Summit, and today's discussion is a continuation of that quite successful conversation. We are meeting at a pivotal moment for global partnership on security. One thing is clear: the Trump administration's focus has never been clearer on mineral security. Just 1 week from now, the U.S. Department of State will convene an inaugural minerals ministerial, bringing together governments and partners to advance cooperation on critical minerals. Ministers from around the world have committed to being there, and we expect that meeting to accelerate a new phase of global deal-making. That is why today's conversation is especially timely. Korea Zinc recently entered into major agreements with the Departments of Defense and Commerce, alongside U.S. industry and financing partners, to support a $7.4 billion investment in Tennessee that will help us reduce our dependence on China. And I think the chairman will talk about that investment and will be traveling to Tennessee this week, if I'm not mistaken. This approach also reflects a broader shift that we're starting to see across allied economies, moving beyond capital investment alone to partnerships focused on long-term industrial collaboration and jointly promoting a more secure global economy. It's exactly the kind of partnership models that the Atlantic Council is focused on elevating: practical, scalable, and grounded in trusted alliances. Our mission statement is shaping the global future together with partners and allies. And that happens on all sorts of levels, but increasingly in terms of securing minerals and supply chains. I'm especially pleased today that today marks the chairman's first public appearance in the United States following this landmark achievement and agreement. Chairman Choi has helped grow Korea Zinc into one of the world's leading non-ferrous metals processing companies, and he brings deep experience across refining, recycling, and global industrial partnerships. His perspective is uniquely valuable as policymakers and industry leaders grapple with how to translate ambition into execution. Following Chairman Choi's keynote remarks, he'll be joined by Reed Blakemore, Director of Research and Programs at our Global Energy Center, for a conversation, followed by audience Q&A. So please go to askac.org to submit questions as they come to mind. With that, it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Yun Choi, Executive Chairman and CEO of Korea Zinc.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for that wonderful introduction, Mr. Kemp. So I am Yun Choi, Korea Zinc Chairman and CEO, and thanks for having me. So we are here to talk about critical minerals and the context in which we are to navigate this set of problems. When we say critical minerals, I think I would like to, dedicate a chunk of my talks to perhaps, at first identifying the problem that is called critical minerals. Before I do that, delve into that, I would like to give you some provisos. I'm not a geopolitical expert, and just a mere CEO of Korea Zinc, a very good company, very 51-year-old company, very good at smelting and refining of critical minerals. However, we've been doing the same thing for the last 50 years. We've been, of course, innovating, evolving, transforming ourselves, and adding byproducts and efficiencies to our operations so that we now produce not just zinc, but more than 20 metals, about 13 of which are critical minerals as defined by the Geological Survey, U.S. Geological Survey. However, the zinc that we produced, say, 51 years ago is the same zinc that we produce today. So it is not us that changed and prompted me to come up here and talk to you about the world and about very important issues. Rather, it's the world that changed, that prompted and perhaps changed the significance of the things that we are doing. So, please bear in mind that what I will be talking about is not necessarily a comprehensive academic view of the world and the geopolitical settings that we're dealing with, but rather a particular and perhaps provincial view from a business person that the new world that all of a sudden considers various minerals we produce critical. I don't think I need to go into details about why the minerals that we produce are critical. Data centers, robotics, AI, all of these sectors are going to be transformative. And together, I think they will be more transformative than ever. Anything that we have seen in the history of human development. And I don't think I need to preach that to the choir. And also, again, another point to the context of this discussion, these developments around critical minerals is let's face it, it's an adversarial context of the situation, which is between the U.S. and China, and all the trade conflicts and tit for tat that's been going on for a while. I really do believe that it's been decades in the making, but I think I've been coming to the United States regarding the critical minerals for this and that reason for a couple of years at least. And back in 2024, around September, China imposed the export restrictions on antimony, gallium, germanium, and graphite. It was the big news, and it influenced, affected Korea Zinc quite a bit. However, at that time, I was thinking to myself, China was quite careful, probably, picking the critical minerals that mattered and that could produce some sort of effect that they desired. However, they were careful not to pick the ones that are too sensitive, perhaps too cutthroat. Then, many things happened. Liberation Day happened, and I think it was almost immediately after Liberation Day that China came up with another export restriction on rare earths elements. And it was, I think, the entire mood changed at this move when I frequented the U.S. and the people that I talked to. Before that, I think a lot of times the kind of critical minerals issues that we were talking about were seen as somewhat of more of an economic issue, and how we want to structure the market and so on and so forth, prosper the investments. I think after this moment of the export restrictions on the rare earths and the consequences, the severe consequences that it created in the U.S., it became more of a national security concerns. And it was quite stark, the difference between the two perspectives. I think it changed the entire the canvas for me. So I think it was important to point that out. So I would like to kind of take the current score of the critical minerals between basically U.S. and China or in the world, and in order to do that, I would like to perhaps take copper as an example. And I think if you look at copper in and of itself is a very, very important critical minerals. Perhaps one could almost say that it is probably the most important critical minerals. And because of that feature, I think it teaches us quite a bit. So if you can put up the slide that I prepared. Okay, so I first like to give credit to Trafigura, and my friends in Trafigura, who is responsible for these, research and these slides. Very informative, great research, and thank you for letting me use them in this speech. So the first slide gives you a very, very simple fact, which is that, strategic sectors have contributed significantly to the demand growth of copper in the recent years. But that's a pretty obvious point. And perhaps another obvious point is that demand growth has come mostly from China. Again, this is due to probably their arc in the business development situation and the development of the Chinese economy. Now, the next page. So this is now understandable, but in order to secure, so China actually decided that, I think, at some point, maybe 20, 30 years ago, that of course they cannot control where the mines occur. The copper mines are going to be in Africa, in Australia, in United States, and South America, and you cannot relocate them to China. So they're going to do what they can, which means that they're going to at least be able to smelt all the copper that they will need, they will consume. I think they made this decision, and they have executed that plan quite dutifully and consistently over the years. So if you look at this chart, over the course of about 10 years, China has consistently increased their smelting capacity within its nation, within China. And you can see in this graph on the left that China is the only country in which the import of copper has decreased over the course of about 15 years consistently and quite dramatically. And what is important, I guess, I think it's that by that happening, all the other countries listed here, Japan, Europe, US, Korea, is showing in a way an opposite trend, and which obviously makes sense because as China adds on smelting capacities of copper, the world recognizes, and the world let me remind you that this is the world operating within the concept of free trade and capitalism and so on and so forth. So the world obviously took that signal and stopped building copper smelting facilities within their own jurisdictions, which produced this result. So the intent of China not wanting to rely on the imports of something like copper. I mean, I think that could be very benign and very understandable in certain ways. It's a very, very important commodity that fuels many of the strategic sectors that it aims to excel in. And therefore, perhaps the reason really is just that they just wanted to be self-reliant. I think intent, whether that's benign or somewhat sinister, it doesn't really matter as to what we are going to find out or what I'm trying to convey to you today with this slide and the coming slides, which is let's just concentrate on the consequences of what happened, that decision, by China to, we're going to smelt everything in China, all the copper that we're going to need in China. So in order to do that, they had to decide that it is not money that they are after, but an output. So if you look at these graphs, it's, by making this decision, it was not as if the smelters in China, the copper smelters, were making a ton of money, and that was what was fueling this trend of building extra capacity after extra capacity after extra capacity. And this is the price of copper starting from 2011 to 2026. And that, light step curve called incentive is, arguably the price at which a copper investment in copper infrastructure, such as copper smelters, are justified. And if you look at the price of copper, basically, declining quite rapidly from 2011 to 2016, and knowing that that is the time at which the copper smelters were being built most intensely in China, I can reinforce my point and the fact that this move of China building copper smelters have been against the market trend. It wasn't really there to, for economic gain. And this is, I think, good for China. This is a sensible decision, I guess, a nation could make to decide its own fate. However, I just like to talk about what this does to the rest of the world. In fact, in the base metal sectors, we do have a commonly referred terminology called ROW, which actually stands for the rest of the world. And that's because China is such a huge force and huge market that almost has its own category. So as China builds smelters after smelters, and the mines are limited, right, all over the world. They're selling concentrates to Chinese smelters, and because there are so many more Chinese smelters and thereby more smelters, period, in the world, the power, the leverage between the miners and the smelters over the course of years, I think it's safe to say, has shifted dramatically to the side of the mines. And actually, it was yesterday's news in Reuters or someplace where the TCRC, which is the price, the fees that the mines charge or the smelters charge to the miners for the concentrates that they buy, for copper concentrates, reached a new record low of negative $75. And it was actually interesting that in the article, a trader is quoted saying that it is okay because of high silver price and the gold price, and the smelter can still make about $200 per ton profit on a, per ton of copper, I presume. However, if you look at this number, that's 200 out of the current copper price, which is $13,000, which is about 1.5%. So I'm not a copper smelter expert here, but if you're looking at all the infrastructure, all the depreciation, the huge capex, the geopolitical uncertainties, working capital, huge working capital, interest rates, hedging costs, and also the need for us as CEOs and the management of public companies to justify our existence to the shareholders every quarter. If you consider all that, 1.5% margin is certainly not something that you can take to your board and say, you know what, I'm going to spend $5 billion, $10 billion to build this new, copper smelter in any other place in your jurisdiction, basically. So I think everybody did a sensible thing, which is to refrain from building smelters and let the Chinese build. I mean, there was nothing that one could do about that. And at least enjoy, I mean, there are people who enjoyed this, the environment, which is that the mines were able to sell the concentrates at a price that was much more expensive than what they were able to do in the past. And the consumers of copper, I think, probably enjoyed the lower price of copper because of the abundance of the production. And, this is just a side point, really. We're talking about smelting and we're talking about processing of critical minerals, but the smelter is the issue that is urgent today. The mines supply may become an issue in the future. As China, obviously cannot relocate mines, can obviously, certainly invest in mines that are located in foreign jurisdictions. And they've been doing that consistently. And at some point, their dependency on copper mines will turn into their dominance, as they have done so with smelting capacity, processing capacity. So this slide is actually from a metals and mining governor's committee of the World Economic Forum that I'm part of. And it is from a report that we produced called Minerals to Megawatts, which is a very catchy title. But it shows you the kind of the current score. So if you look at this, on the left there are all these critical minerals, and it shows you which country is responsible for what percentage of the production in the mining, which is the center column, and the processing. And the theme is quite obvious, and theme is pretty stark. When you look at there are some concerning, rows on the middle column, but if you look at the right column, it's China everywhere. They control. So in connection with all the critical minerals, at least today, the major way in which China controls and dominates the markets of critical minerals is through dominating the processing of critical minerals, as it does in the case of copper, as I try to show you. And it's a very small print here, so I think the copper is on the next page. Yeah, in the middle, you can see China, smelting capacity in China is about 57%, and going up. So, other than telling you a very simple fact that this is the current score, and that China controls quite a bit of copper smelting capacity. What other lesson can we learn from this? I think, like I said, because of the non-market price-driven decision by China and a consistent and disciplined execution of that plan over the course of a couple decades by China to build extra capacity for smelting, copper smelting in China, that created a very low TCs and RCs for copper concentrates for the rest of the world, including the Chinese. Chinese had to suffer this too. However, they were willing to bear this, and they were able to bear this, perhaps with governmental help and other things. However, the market signal dictated that everybody stopped investing in copper smelting capacity all around the world. What I'm trying to say is that, I am trained, I guess, in the Western style of academia and economics and whatnot. And I do also share somewhat of a sanctified sense of the market and how the market should be our signals and how we should operate within the market and all that. However, the market as it stands now of critical minerals is no longer functioning the way it should be functioning. At least, the price is the price and the market is the market, yes. And, the price of the copper concentrates are expensive because there are more smelters buying concentrates than the mines. However, what I'm saying, I guess more precisely, is that the constructive function of the market, and our belief that if we obey or adhere to the signals that are given to the market, market will correct itself, and that we will be better for it in the long run. I think that theory, that assumption, no longer applies, no longer is valid. And in fact, if we actually continue to listen to the market signals, at least in the connection with critical minerals, as we have done for the last decade or two, the dominance of China will grow further, and it will strengthen China's dominance, and it will weaken the rest of the world in this regard. So, I would like to, I think I talked too much, and I would like to open up for questions and invite Mr. Reed up here. But I just wanted to give you some snippets about the current context, current problem, and perhaps we can talk to Mr. Reed about, and I can suggest, not really talk about, but suggest some possible solutions to this very, very serious problem. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. My name is Reed Blakemore. I'm the Director of Research and Programs for the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your remarks. I think you made a few things abundantly clear. I think the point you finished your remarks with, which is if we continue to follow the traditional market signal we're seeing, and you referenced copper a lot, but I think it's a similar trend across all of the other critical minerals. We're going to continue to entrench what is fundamentally a growing national security, economic security risk. And there are a few features within that I think are worth exploring. The big theme of today's conversation is partnership. And there are a number of partnership models we see evolving, and including that with Korea Zinc, which I want to spend some time talking about. But you also identified a very specific idea which we see permeating the conversation here in DC more and more, which is while you cannot necessarily control where the upstream geology is, you can control the midstream. And I think that knowledge is beginning to resonate when we think about how we craft supply chain policy, both here in the United States, but I also think in a number of partner and allied countries. With that focus on how we actually address the midstream, I do want to quickly zoom in on the announcement that Korea Zinc made late last year on the integrated processing facility that you're now building in Tennessee. Could you, at a high level, speak to what is the vision for this project, and in your mind, how is it going to contribute to supply chain security, not just for the United States, but I think for its partners around the world?
Okay. Yes, we announced a project called Project Crucible. It is let me go back a little bit. In Korea, we have what's called our flagship operation, which is Onsan plant. In Onsan plant, we have zinc smelting, lead smelting, and copper smelting, and all the byproducts thereof all together. And we have a very wonderful system of tapping into all they work in tandem with each other so that we can extract impurities and byproducts from one metallurgical circuit to the other and maximize recovery and profitability thereby. So in Onsan, our Onsan smelter, Onsan refinery, produces more than 20 metals and metal compounds, about 13 of which are critical minerals. So we decided to take a half size of Onsan as a starting point, which will produce about 13 metals and other chemical compounds, 11 of which are critical minerals, and build it in Tennessee, Clarksville, Tennessee. Of course, the U.S. government and its consortium has taken an equity stake in Korea Zinc to make this happen, as well as provide very stable and attractive financings to back this project up. However, but I think it was possible also because, one, the need for the U.S., which is we are potentially talking about 11 of the critical minerals problems having a quasi-permanent solutions as far as the processing of those critical minerals are concerned. So that is valuable for the U.S. And for us, we are actually quite an anomaly, Korea Zinc, in a sense that we are quite profitable. If you look at smelting and refining companies around the world of base metals and other types of metals that we produce, you will have a hard time finding companies that actually make consistent returns over a longer period of time. We've been able to do that because we, decades ago decided that we are actually essentially a technology company rather than base metals smelting and refining company. So I think it was a mutually beneficial decision, an easy decision in a way, on both sides, that is the U.S. government as well as Korea Zinc itself, because for the U.S. it solves 11 of the critical minerals problems, like I said, but also for Korea Zinc, this represents almost a quantum leap for us in terms of our earnings, our growth plans, and the penetration into the U.S. market, which we value obviously greatly.
One of the fascinating things about the project, and you mentioned this last week, is that the site in Tennessee actually already has $3 billion in minerals ready to be recovered. And I think that's why you get to the number of the 11 different minerals that the project is able to bring to bear. A lot of that is a function of simply recovery and byproduct recovery as well, which is an additional part to how we need to think about supply chain security efforts in the aggregate. We need to think about the ways in which we turn one upstream asset into a diversity of other mineral supply chain solutions. In a way, it's a matter of unlocking hidden supply from one particular mineral. Can you speak a little bit to what the byproduct recovery looks like at that site, and how, in particular, this project is actually really unique in terms of what it's going to achieve for supply chain security?
Sure. And I think in order to talk about the uniqueness of the Tennessee project, I actually need to talk about the uniqueness of our Korean project as well, and how it evolved over the course of 51 years. So Korea has, in the beginning, we had a zinc mine, which was, I think, a pretty good one, but it was depleted a long time ago. So today, we produce about 1.2 million tons of various metals in Korea, through this Onsan refinery. And we do not have any mines around the world that, we are not vertically integrated at all. So that's a pretty unique vulnerability to have. It's not, please, let me tell you, this is not by choice. But the fact that we are in Korea, the fact that we had to keep on innovating in order to survive, I think we kind of ended up in this situation. But in order to, so if you are a smelter refiner of metals and you have no vertical integration, and you have to buy, right now, in order to produce 1.2 million tons of metals, we have to buy more than 2 million tons of feed of some kind, from all over the world. And that means you cannot pick and choose. Mm-hmm. You have to be you have to have a voracious appetite in terms of, your feed. And that you have to buy the feed that other peoples don't want. Mm. And fortunately, those feed usually mean that they are dirty or contain quite a bit of impurities, which makes them cheaper and which makes them less desired, and probably a bit of a challenge for the engineers who have to deal with that. However, we had no choice of, rejecting these materials, so we kept on feeding them, and that allowed us to actually hone in our skills and technology to extract more byproducts, impurities out of those things. And that's why when we, refine zinc, we have geologically, sometimes zinc deposits, sometimes have indium, obviously cadmium, germanium, gallium, tellurium, these type of things. So we are able to extract all of these things. We have the technologies for it. And when it comes to lead, when you do lead smelting, that enables us to produce all the byproducts of lead, which are antimony, bismuth, silver, gold, platinum, and so on and so forth. And copper, basically, same, similar critical minerals, but also add cobalt and other type of additional ones. So that allowed us to be very, very disciplined when it comes to being able to extract all the metals that are within whatever feed that is from the mines, from the recycled materials that we source from all over the world. And also, another thing that compelled us to evolve on is the land. Land in Korea is very limited and very expensive. So we were not able to have abundant land on which we can just dispose of our tailings or the smelting residues, which then required us to have processes by which we can process our own residues and minimize our residues. And in fact, it came to a point where we're actually actively buying various smelting and refining residues from places like Europe or Peru or other places, wherever they are available. And so that is the technology that will enable us to treat the residue that is present in Clarksville, Tennessee location. And thankfully, that residue in Clarksville, which I think is about a little bit more than 600,000 tons, contain quite a bit of zinc, quite a bit of copper, a bit of silver, and also germanium and gallium as well. So that is a source of, if you have the technology to extract the metals contained within, it can be a source of, significant revenue.
Mm-hmm. And so I do want to kind of broaden the aperture a little bit now to thinking about how this does represent a really strong new model for allied partnership for mineral security. And I think the place I'll start there is really what distinguishes the partnership in Tennessee as a strategic partnership rather than just a commercial deal. And I think I also might use this as an opportunity to bring in one of our audience questions from Ian Roberts. Again, feel free to ask questions at askac.org, which is this question from Ian Roberts, which is, I want to pull the thread on this question, which is, how can these type of ideas be sold to U.S. and NATO allies to collaborate on joint ventures? So really two questions I'm asking you here. One, how do we distinguish the Tennessee deal as a strategic partnership rather than just another interesting commercial deal? And two, what does success look like for that deal, and how can we sell this idea more and more and more to U.S. partners, NATO partners, other allies, so we just get more of these deals more of these partnerships in the pipeline?
Okay, that's a tough question to answer, because I think Korea Zinc, the company, and the Project Crucible, the deal in Tennessee that we did with the U.S. government, it's more of an anomaly than indicative of the general market and general sector capabilities. However, it does speak to the fact that while when U.S. grapples with the problems of critical minerals, it does require the U.S. to look beyond itself. Mm-hmm. And I mean that not only in processing of minerals, and I think processing minerals, it's not many people have done it in the U.S. for a long, long time, and that's the kind of a initial resistance to it, and the need to rebuild that type of human resources and whatnot that gives people pause. But it is not a rocket science. Mm-hmm. I think there are a bunch of very, very smart people in the U.S. and also people who have the foundational knowledge and the experience of these sectors in the allied countries of the United States. So I think there's a good foundation. However, don't just be obsessed with the processing sectors of critical minerals, I say. I mean, when I was talking about copper earlier, China has done quite a bit in what they could control, which is the processing of the copper, the smelting capacity of copper within China. It has not been lazy in terms of having indirect investments in copper mines around the world. If you look at the World Economic Forum chart that I showed earlier and see the mining column of the slide, where we have all these countries, Indonesia, Congo, and India and other countries, Australia, mm-hmm. Which are taking up a very significant and perhaps dominant position in the mining of these critical minerals. These are the countries that U.S. can definitely and should, I think, actively try to partner up with. Mind you that when China dominates the markets of critical minerals, because China does not care about the profitability of some of these foundational sectors, mining sectors and smelting sectors. I believe that China views these sectors as more of a utilitarian in purpose rather than, the sectors that are to be prosperous within, in and of itself. It is really there to serve the more strategic, the goals that China has, AIs and EVs and robotics and renewable energies and so on and so forth. So the sting of lower prices, whether that's in the form of TCs and RCs or in the form of the metal prices themselves, is being felt by the jurisdictions on that column. Whether that's Indonesia or Congo. They are selling, in some of those countries, if you look at it, quite a bit of their GDP is, attributable to that generation of and production of critical minerals. And I'm sure they are feeling this sting where the price of those metals have hurt their GDPs and the growth, trajectories of that country. So perhaps I'm thinking that it is a good time for the U.S. to extend an olive branch or at least, start a conversation in those regards. Mind you, it is not total dominance that U.S. needs in the space of critical minerals in order to combat or in order to counterbalance the dominance of China. As long as one is able to secure or buy, access critical minerals at a market price, that is all you need, really. The problem comes when, as we have seen in the export restrictions, that has stopped functioning, and that is the fear and the worries that is driving all these investments. But I think just to summarize the long answer that I gave, look towards the mining partners, look towards underdeveloped countries too, because I think with the restrictions of ESG and other types of parameters under which one is perhaps not so at liberty to invest in these countries, I think China has definitely made quite a bit of leeway into those in having making some cornerstone investments in those countries, and I think U.S. really cannot afford to sit idle just because some country is less developed than the U.S. or the Western world, and we have to come to terms with that and work with that partner, do things that will improve the conditions of that country and benefit that country and economically as well as socially, and be a real partner.
Yeah. So we're about running out of time. I have one last question, because I agree with you. In a way, this is about bringing as many countries and partners into the fold strategically as we possibly can in order to address these supply chain vulnerabilities. We obviously have this forthcoming mineral security ministerial next week. So it appears that we're going to get yet another round of deal-making and partnership building from this administration. But from your perspective, as you look to, say, the next year, because this has been a pretty transformative year in the U.S.'s approach to mineral supply chain activity. So when you look to the next year, what are you looking for to see that the United States, its partners and allies, are really making headway to address this problem? What are the key signposts that you think suggest that we're actually making a difference here?
I think the ultimate goal, and I think I see the evidence of this and the suggested direction in the recent presidential proclamation after the investigation under Section 232. And perhaps trying to create a market that is bifurcated, that is a little bit more reflective of the current conditions of critical minerals, and perhaps is able to provide constructive signals to the market, like I was talking about. I think that is a very ambitious and necessary goal for the United States government to pursue. It is a very difficult one, of course, because there are many members of this coalition with diverse interests and whatnot. However, I think I'm still hopeful because execution of additional bilateral deals, maybe, things, that are similar to our project, the project in Tennessee, as well as some other project that has been announced of late. I think more of these bilateral deals and executions of them will provide platforms and holds and grips with which U.S. can try to tackle a bigger objective, which is to have a coalition of the nations and the partners that it can do business with, but to jump to that ambitious endeavor without perhaps securing more bilateral deals is perhaps a little bit reckless. I think we need U.S. government probably needs a little bit more grips and a little bit more holds in order for it to sustain itself and to kind of propel itself to the next stage, which is what is, I think, contemplated in that presidential proclamation.
Yeah, I think you said it exactly right. This is a process of coalition building that I think we're seeing happen in real time. And that coalition building is both diplomatic, but also done hand in hand with the private sector as well. And I think that's why there's so much enthusiasm in this city about the new project in Tennessee. And hopefully, I think over time, we begin to see more and more of those diplomatic strategic partnerships as well as those commercial partnerships, which are ultimately going to make things more successful. I know we've used quite a bit of your time here this morning, so thank you, Mr. Chairman, for spending time with us. We look forward to hosting you again, and thank you for your leadership in this space, and we look forward to seeing what the next year brings, both in terms of your activities, but also this wider and highly dynamic space around critical mineral supply chain investment. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Thank you.